So the car market is struggling so much right now. We're having days of inventory go up and up and up and up. But what I wanted to do was bring in an expert. Someone's been in the industry for 40 years, way longer than me, to be able to talk about what they think is the worst thing that's going on in the car market right now. So I want to welcome Ray to come in and talk about what he thinks is the biggest issue for the car market right now.
Hey, Brandon, good to see you, and thank you for having me on. And I love this question because I think one of the biggest things that the industry is facing at the moment is something that we don't talk about enough, and that is negative equity. And the number of people who have negative equity and how much negative equity on average most people might have today. I know Edmunds has come up with a number. It's like $6,254 is the average amount of negative equity that people have today. And honestly, I think that number's way off. I think it's way low. And the reason I say that is all the people that bought new cars at the end of 2021, all of 2022, when they were paying market adjustments and things like that, when there were shortages. Well, those people's negative equity is going to be much higher than $6,200.
So you were in a franchise store for what, about 40 years, and so when a customer would come in to you with all of this negative equity, I know negative equity is not it's not weird for us to see in the car market over the years, but just the amount of what we're dealing with right now is the bad part about it. So when you had a customer that would come in with $6,000 negative equity to your store, how would you, were there any strings you could pull, anything that you could do to get that customer into the next deal, to roll that into the next deal? What would you do in that situation?
Well, in many cases, depending upon credit history, if people had really excellent credit, we could get the banks to do a loan to value ratio of 125 or 130% of MSRP. So let's, since I'm not real good at math, if it was a $10,000 car, that $10,000 MSRP, a bank would lend to somebody that had really good credit $13,000 on that. Well, if a customer came in and they had a trade in against that $10,000 car, and that trade in was only worth four, that left $6,000 in negative equity. Well, in most cases, the bank wasn't going to finance 160% or $16,000. They wanted to know how much participation they could expect from the customer. And in most cases, they wanted about $3,000 down. Now, fast forward to late 2021 and 2022, when there was a shortage of new cars and dealers were adding market adjustments. Well, banks at that time, for whatever reason, and I think banks were complicit for doing this, but banks, for whatever reason, they were willing to finance up to 150, 160% of MSRP. So on that $10,000 car, they would have lent $16,000. Well, those folks who did that back in 2021, 2022, the amount of negative equity they have is going to be way higher today because there's no value associated with that market adjustment that gets transferred to the car when you go to trade it in. You paid extra for air. That's it.
So what do you think fixes this car market with this problem that you're talking about? What has to happen to make this not a problem anymore?
Well, there's two things that have to happen. People have to three things perhaps. People have to stay in their car longer than what they had necessarily intended. I know from 43 years in the business that most people who had a car loan that were trying to trade out of it try to trade out at 3 to 3.5 years. Well, if you're in a 72-month car loan or an 84-month car loan, you just have way too much negative equity at that point in time. So you need to stay in the car longer and pay it down. Or you need to save money and be able to bring some cash to bear when you want to trade out of it. You need to bring some cash to help compensate for that negative equity. I know at the latter part of my career, I would trade salespeople to say, we found that most of our customers are $3,000 to $4,000 negative in their trade, meaning that the car loan is $3,000 to $4,000 more than what the value of the vehicle is. How were you preparing to handle that negative equity? In other words, asking the customer, because you can't just expect us to eat it all or bury it all. And unless there's cash, and unless there's banks that are willing to continue to do it 150, 160%, and right now, as we both know, banks are becoming more stringent as to how they'll approve a loan, it's going to be harder and harder for people with substantial negative equity to get out of the vehicle without a substantial amount of cash down.
So I've talked to a franchise manager recently, and what he said that they used to be able to do was roll people into leases to be able to get them out of their negative equity. And I'm not I'm not in the new car realm of things. I've never worked for a new car dealership or anything like that. Can you explain to me what he was meaning by being able to get people out of their negative equity by rolling it into a lease?
If you roll negative equity into a lease, and in some cases, and many cases, you can. The beauty of doing that is at the end of the lease, at the end of the 3-year lease, you're starting back at zero. If you had $6,000 in negative equity, at the end of 36 months, you have zero negative equity. You have no equity at all because that's not your vehicle. Now, having said that, every $1,000 added to a lease increases the payment by about $30 per month. So if you have someone that's trying to trade in a car that has $6,000 of negative equity that you want to roll into the lease, that's adding $180 a month to the lease payment. If they're $10,000 negative, that's adding $300 a month to the payment if they would still qualify. Because the same lending guidelines apply. There's only so much negative you can bury into either another new car loan or a new car lease. You can perhaps bury a little more into the lease than you can into the loan.
So rolling it into the lease, from what I'm hearing you explain, it almost sounds like you're paying a credit card off with another credit card.
It's exactly what you're doing. If you had $6,000 of negative, you're paying $180 every month of that lease payment is just going to handle that negative equity. So yes, in essence, what you've done is you've said, okay, well, let me put that $6,000 on this credit card. Well, in this case, let me put that $6,000 on this new car lease. And instead of my payment being $500 a month that it should be, it's $680 a month. But I can afford that. If I tried to do it on a purchase, my payment might be $1,000 a month. I can't afford that. So it's just transferring the debt from one card to another in essence.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the conversation that I had with this franchise manager, and what he believed fixed this market was that MSRPs had to come down. He's got to get cars that are cheaper so people can get in. But my question to you is, okay, if that fixes the market and the MSRPs get rolled down, that means all prices across the board have to get rolled down. Does this not make a bigger negative equity problem in the market for the people who have bought in the last couple of years?
It would make it more difficult. And here's why it would make it more difficult. If you could finance up to 130% of MSRP, if the MSRP was $10,000, you could finance an extra $3,000. If the new MSRP is $8,000, you can only finance an extra $2,400. Well, there's $600 less of negative equity that you can roll into that cheaper car. So Will cheaper cars bring more people back into the marketplace? They should. If those cheaper cars bring back the customers that have negative equity, will that exacerbate the situation for those customers? It more than likely would, because you can't finance as much on that cheaper car. And if I may, we at CarEdge have partnered with Black Book, and we're doing a survey at www.caredge.com/negative to get people to participate, so that we can get a better understanding of how many people have negative equity and how much negative equity they have. And Black Book has partnered with us in order to look at this information provided by our customers out there, our viewers out there, so that we can get a clearer understanding of what the negative equity situation truly is.
So I want you to dig into your Rolodex that's up here and see if you can remember. Can you remember the worst case of negative equity that you have ever seen throughout your years working at a franchise dealership?
I had this was before the Great Recession, when everybody's home values were going up quickly, and people were basically using their home equity lines of credit as an ATM. So they could take money out of their home to allow them to do the things that they wanted to do.
That sounds familiar.
I had some people that had a trade. I don't remember what the trade was, but they were, I don't know, $16,000 to $18,000 upside down in their vehicle, and they wanted a new MDX. Had to have a new MDX. And so their solution was that they were going to take out $18,000 from their home equity line of credit to put that down to make their car whole. Now, that's great, except that suddenly you're buying a new MDX and you have a payment on your MDX that's for 5 years. Your home equity line of credit, they give you like up to 15 years to pay that off. And suddenly you're paying off an extra $18,000 over God knows how long a term. It could just be an insane amount of money that you're spending to make that vehicle whole.
So back in 2008, how much was that MDX that they bought? How can you be $18,000 underwater then? I would assume the MDX then was what, maybe a $40,000 car, or is it more than that?
Yeah, it was about a $40,000 car, yeah. And I don't know what they, I forget what they were trading in. It might have been a big pickup truck or something. I don't know, but they wanted out of it. They wanted out of it.
So they were upside down, not on the MDX, they were upside down on the truck.
In their trade-in, yes. In their truck.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And they wanted out of it at any cost. And I said to them, I don't think the best use of your home equity line of credit is to make your current vehicle whole. I wouldn't advise you to do that. But obviously, if that's the direction you want to go and you've made that decision, just know that you've made that decision against what my advice to you would be. I thought it was one of the dumbest uses of a home equity line of credit I had ever seen or witnessed.
So going back to all this negative equity that's in the system right now. So I talk about like a Dodge Charger. It's an easy target, because 2 years ago you couldn't find them on dealer lot. So dealers were charging $10,000 over MSRP, yes, and people were paying it. So now we fast forward to now, and that same Charger that they paid $10,000 over MSRP, they owe more on that 2-year-old Charger than what they can buy a brand new one for today. So do you foresee this having any kind of problem where customers wake up, they kind of see that and are like, well, if I could just go buy a new one, why am I continuing to pay for this one? And they just walk away from their cars.
Yeah, you can walk away from the car until that repossession, that voluntary repossession, hits the credit bureaus, and then whatever whatever good car loan rates or finance rates you qualify for anything now will be 3, 4, 5, 10 times higher in the future because of that voluntary repossession. And the cost of doing that voluntary repossession will stick with you for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years. The extra amounts you're going to have to pay anytime you utilize credit in the future is astronomical in comparison to if you just would have paid off that existing car.
So do you foresee any kind of push for people to try to not have a car loan and to buy cars more for cash? Now, what I'm seeing from my car dealership is that, okay, I'm seeing all these other car dealers that are hurting. I'm seeing that because I'm seeing auction prices come down where I can buy a lot of cars again.
Yes.
And we can't keep a car on our lot. Now, my dealership, we sell cars that are $5,000 and under. As soon as we get a new batch of cars in, they're gone. So what I think I am experiencing right now is that there are customers that are trying to get away from car loans and coming and paying cash for a car so they don't have to deal with a note. They're living within their means and not having to take on that debt. Do you see any kind of shift? It's probably not going to be in a major way, but do you see more customers going that route just so they can avoid whatever negative equity crisis that we're dealing with right now?
I think you're onto something, and the reason I think you're onto something is that the average transaction price for new vehicles has gotten so high that there's a much larger percentage of people today who figure they can't participate in ever buying a new car again. So if they're not going to be able to get a new car, they might as well get a used car that they can pay cash for, and that they are no longer slaves to the banks and the credit unions, and that they don't have to be paying interest on everything that they want in life.
Yeah, it's a sad thing. So help us out, everybody. I want you to go to this link down in the description below and fill out this negative equity form, this survey that CarEdge is working on right now. They're working on with Black Book. We're trying to get some data behind this so we can get better numbers. So this is something I really would love for you to head over there, get it filled out for us so we can have as big of a sample size as possible. And again, I'll leave that link down in the description below. Please like, subscribe, do all the things, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. And Ray, thank you for coming on with us today.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for having me, and thank you for helping with this.
All right. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good day. Boom.